Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talks at Google. My name is Suzette, and I'm incredibly excited to introduce our guest today, the phenomenally talented author, Stephanie Land. In her beautifully written New York Times best-selling memoir, Maid, Hard Work, Low Pay, and a Mother's Will to Survive, Stephanie details the many difficult truths of living in poverty in America. When circumstances derailed her plans of attending college to become a writer, Stephanie quickly found herself as a single mother, freshly out of an abusive relationship with no money, no support, and limited options. Driven to carve out a better life for her family, Stephanie cleaned houses by day and took online classes by night, writing relentlessly as she worked towards earning a college degree. She wrote of the true stories that weren't being told, of living on food stamps and WIC coupons, the hurdles to get government assistance that barely provided housing, and the shame others often tried to inflict upon her for receiving what little assistance that she did. Stephanie lays out the sobering realities of achieving the American dream if you are living below the poverty line, and the challenges, and also challenges the deep-rooted stigmas of the working poor. Maid is an emotionally raw and powerful first-hand account of Stephanie's years spent as a maid in service to upper-middle-class America, and it is also the inspiration for the acclaimed Netflix limited series, Maid. Stephanie's work truly brings a much-needed spotlight to inequities in our society, while also being an inspiring testament to the courage, determination, and ultimate strength of the human spirit. If you're joining us live today, we will be taking audience questions towards the end of the talk. So please be sure to add your questions for Stephanie throughout the discussion at any time in the live stream comments section. So without further ado, please welcome Stephanie Land.
Hi.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yes, thank you so much for making the time to talk with us all today. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to meet with you and for you to share more about your writing, your experiences, and your perspectives with all of us. So first off, congratulations on the success of your incredible book, Maid. To set the stage for those watching who may not have read it yet, I just want to share the very first line of your book, which is truly a concise and powerful framing for the entire book. The first line reads, "My daughter learned to walk in a homeless shelter." And honestly, I had to take a moment to pause after reading that because it really generated the wave of emotions, with that line. Can you talk a bit about the circumstances at the time that brought you to that point and what led up to your earliest experiences working as a maid?
Boy. Okay. Well, to set the scene, it was 2008. So right when the Great Recession started happening. And I had to leave the home where I was living because my boyfriend at the time started to be more physically abusive than emotional. And he punched out this like plexiglass window that we had. We lived in a trailer, and that was finally like some raw evidence that I could show to police. Yeah. And so I ended up staying at my dad's house for about a month. And that didn't work out. I guess you'll have to read the book to find out why. But so I sat at their kitchen table and I filled notebooks with all of these numbers of, I wanted to go anywhere else but Port Townsend because that's kind of where I just ran from. And that was the only place that had availability. And I was told by a lawyer that I had hired pro bono through the Northwest Justice Project, huge deal. That program is amazing. But she advised me to not move into a domestic violence shelter because that would be seen too much as like a transitional thing. And a lot of times they don't have the funds to set you up for housing beyond that. And so I was at the homeless shelter and it was like a little cabin. It was like a little house that two families were supposed to share, but I got it to myself the whole time, which was pretty amazing. So it was like we had our own little space. It wasn't like what most people imagine homeless shelters, where there's a bunch of bunk beds
Yeah.
and all that. And I started working for a friend of mine's husband doing landscaping. And I really loved that work. I mean, it's physical, but kind of in a good way.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, yard work to me is always kind of rewarding.
Being out in nature and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're outside, you don't have to deal with cat dander and
Yeah. Yeah.
but I also started just looking for work, any type of work that I could do.
Yeah.
But I had to get this childcare grant in order to really work. And so for a few weeks, you had to have an established job before you would be approved for the childcare grant.
Oh, wow.
So it was like 2 or 3 weeks of establishing myself as like a landscaper, I guess, and
Yeah.
like asking all of the clients to submit letters, like signed statements saying like, yes, I am absolutely like working in their yard from noon to 2 or something. And then I was able to get a little bit of childcare help from that. But it was very part-time and only a certain amount of days a week. So, and I guess, that just, I kept applying for jobs and kept getting turned down because all of the
Mhm.
jobs that were available during daycare hours were kind of professional jobs that I had no experience at. And coffee shops didn't want to hire me because I had a kid and
Mm.
um, and relied on daycare. And so working as a maid just kind of became the only job that was really available to me during daycare hours. But it
Wow.
was really limiting. Like I could only work a certain amount of hours. There was a lot of traveling, a lot of driving involved that I wasn't paid
Yeah.
for. So it worked out.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
it
the
was a
road to that though is tremendous, an emotional roller coaster just reading about it. And so your experiences when you did get the job working as a maid were largely around working as a house cleaner for like upper middle class America in the Pacific Northwest, and as you noted, at minimum wage, where you weren't paid for travel. And you were describing that role of being a maid as one of invisibility. Can you talk a bit about what you mean by being invisible?
Yeah, I it was very, very obvious that the only evidence that I was allowed to leave that I had been in their house was through the work and not necessarily through me.
Mm,
Um, like I folded toilet paper into little triangles and, left lines with my vacuum. But I was instructed to not leave any footprints in the carpet or sometimes even if I forgot a rag, the customer would call and complain that I had left evidence that I had cleaned the house, that I personally had cleaned the house.
oh,
And and then the company I worked for, they had a lot of they had really high turnover just because the job is really physically demanding and doesn't pay great. So um,
yeah,
uh, so not many of my clients really even knew my name or knew anything about me personally. Um, it just it kind of felt like I like only the work was seen and not me
yeah.
as a person.
And in I mean, saying that, thinking about working in an office or working in other capacities, like that is not the case. Like you have a very much different level of visibility. So I can't imagine what that adds to your day to day. Was that something you felt like every day working?
Yeah, it was incredibly isolating. I did the job alone. I parented alone.
Yeah.
Um, and being a single parent also limits your social life. And then, I didn't have any money to go out even if I wanted to. And then I took college classes online, which I guess now we're going at year 3 of the pandemic, which I still
Right.
can't.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're kind of used to doing everything alone. But at that time, I remember the extreme loneliness of it all, and really feeling like I was the only person that I could really depend on.
Yeah.
And sometimes, my body would fail me in a way that I couldn't depend on that either. And so, um, and then, emotionally and just it was really isolating and really hard.
Wow. Oh, goodness. Well, I want to talk a little bit about, some of the stigmas that you call out in your writing, and as talking about your experiences, and particularly the stigma that you're calling out around the word poor. And often this is coming with such like relentless judgment in our society. And you're addressing that false perception that if you're poor, it's because you're lazy, where in reality, there's many people working on minimum wage, and they often make up a very incredibly hardworking, vital segment of the workforce. Um, can you talk about, living through that expectation of having to work several jobs, many varying hours, and, with that assumption that minimum wage is a living wage. So how is it possible that, that you're even in this position?
Well, I mean, I think people ask me that specifically a lot of the time because I am a white person
Interesting.
with a lot of privilege. I, grew up what used to be middle class in the suburbs with two parents and a dog and a couple of cats, um, and at the start of book tour, I noticed that I was getting asked that a lot, like,
Yeah.
"How is it that you fell into poverty?" And or people would say like, "Well, you obviously got yourself out, but what about all of these other people?" And it's to me, there's a lot of underlying racism there.
Yeah.
I think America has a caste system. Isabel Wilkerson just proved that in her book, really, and her book called Caste, which you should absolutely read. And I think poverty and racism go hand in hand. I think when we are um, kind of collectively imagining who is in poverty in this country.
Yeah.
We go back to these old narratives that were brought up by the Reagan administration that kind of got him elected. Was he would talk about the welfare queen over and over again,
Mhm.
um, and how he was going to change that. Um, and then Clinton took it further and coined the phrase welfare to work. And of course now there's really no uh, accessible welfare system. There are programs that you can get on to get some cash, but it's really difficult to be on. It's difficult to understand, which is I think purposeful, because if it's so difficult, then people won't apply and they can use those block grants for something else. The
Mm.
state can, and there's been documented fraud with that too, and um, not in the people who are using the benefit, the people who are supposed to be doling it out.
Managing it. Mhm.
Yeah, and so I think our country relies on um, this population that is doing very low wage work, and a lot of times those jobs are done by people of color, and um, and they're not. Um, I mean, it's impossible to live off of that. Our federal minimum wage is still $7.25. It's really
Wow.
rare to get more than $10 an hour for jobs like that.
Right. And then right there's basically a mathematical impossibility to, provide for yourself. And if you have kids, like how do you actually do that off of that level of income
Yeah,
without more support?
you really can't. I mean, I read pre-pandemic there were some statistics that came out that was a single parent would have to make $30 an hour to make ends meet, or work 140 hours a week at a minimum wage job. And that's just
Wow.
not possible when you are the sole person that is main caregiver for some kids. And um, it's just, we're asking poor people to do an impossible thing. And
Yeah.
then And then, every time they talk about like the child tax credit conversations that were recently going on, Manchin was saying like, oh no, we need work requirements. And that is just, it's so horrible because poor people are working so hard.
Yeah.
And they're already working. Something like 70% of families on SNAP are working families.
Yeah.
And, there are a lot of homeless or houseless populations out there who are families and they are living in their car and like doing whatever they can. But for some reason, I mean, I pretty much know the reason, but we just don't trust poor people with money. And I mean, I can
Yeah.
say, I'm in a much more privileged place at this point, and I budgeted way better when I was poor.
Well, because you had to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew exactly how much I had at all times. I mean, because I needed to know in if I went to the grocery store and needed something that wasn't a SNAP approved item, like tampons or a sponge or dish soap or anything like that,
Wow.
like I had to know exactly how much money I had left on my credit card, how much money I currently had, how much was going to come out that week. Like my budget and like the dates that all the bills came out was always on a piece of paper, like on my kitchen cupboard where I drank coffee at in the morning,
Wow.
just so that I knew exactly what was happening that day.
Wow. So, like, at every moment, this was at the top of your mind.
Oh,
Um,
definitely. Yeah, and I mean, if a client would cancel suddenly or like I couldn't work that day because I was sick or my kid was too sick to take to daycare,
yeah.
I mean that could be 30 or $40, and that could mean I would have to choose between the electric bill and paying rent. Um,
Wow.
and you always pay rent because the rent always eats first. But it's still it's still just this feeling of constant failure
Yeah.
that you're providing for your kid.
Yeah. And that is incredibly hard for any human to have to experience. And you do such a lovely job of describing your experiences in the book. And, doubling back and talking a bit more about, there really is that like heavy burden of shame that in our culture is imposed on people who need financial assistance, and we're operating in a culture and a world that often ties self-worth and societal value to financial income. So feeling like a failure is like, no, it's not speaking about you as a person or anything, but it was directly tied to your ability to make enough money to support your child. And that's an incredibly harsh assumption, that being poor is the result of a personal failure. And so in the book, you're talking a lot about how this stigma crossed into so many aspects of your life, even the simplest day to day things like going to the grocery store, as you mentioned, and how paying for your groceries with like an EBT card would elicit a reaction from people on the grocery line. And I think you mentioned somebody had made a comment about that at one point, something like, "You're
Yeah, it was.
welcome."
Yeah, well, WIC checks used to be this huge paper check.
Mhm.
They would give you 3 months at a time, um, and each month had like 3 or 4 different checks so that you didn't have to get everything at once because you would
Yeah.
get like 5 gallons of milk for some reason. Like I had friends who would make cheese out of the WIC milk that they got. And
Wow.
they it's called a nutrition program. Like you have to be uh, you have to prove that you're nutritionally deficient in some way. And my kid was in like the 20th or 30th percentile for weight, and so she
Wow.
just grew lengthwise before she filled out. Uh,
Yeah.
and so that's how I qualified for it. And I hated everything about the WIC program. I always screwed up like what kind of eggs I needed to get, or you are only supposed to get a certain amount of ounces of cereal and you have to look for the WIC approved item. at the grocery
Wow.
store. But a lot of the boxes of cereal didn't match up with the, like, amount of ounces that I was supposed to get. So I'm there like doing math. And then, but this time in particular, they had switched it so that you could no longer choose to get whole milk that was organic. And they lost some funding, or they switched it because of, they always talked about like the obesity epidemic, and
Mm.
and how they were trying to be more nutritional. And so I could only get this like 2% non-organic milk, but I still had a coupon for the whole milk, and I was really happy to get it. And I, normally would never speak up for myself in these situations, but that was like the one thing that I tried to do for my kid, was just uh,
Yeah.
have really good milk, because they still drank milk a lot then. Um, and like the manager had to get involved to override it, and it was this
Oh
huge
my
scene.
goodness.
The guy in line behind me he was an older white guy, and started like sighing very audibly. And as I was leaving, he huffed and said, "You're welcome."
Oh
And
my gosh.
my immediate thought was like, "You're welcome for what? Like, because your tax dollars paid for this?" Like, I never understood how people can be so personally connected to food benefits programs.
Yeah.
The
And that
SNAP
was an
program,
attitude you got often, like from people basically, or
yeah, I mean, you see it a lot on social media,
yeah.
and whenever they try to increase the SNAP benefits, it's this huge uproar in the government. And um, really, it's probably like 30 cents a day for the average taxpayer. It's really not
Wow.
that much. And then the people who are using that benefit, they only get $1 a meal per person today for per day.
Wow.
It might have increased to $1.30. They just increased the amounts recently.
Wow.
But it's really not that much. And it's not like you have a lot of time or energy to make a huge pot of rice and beans all the time.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I don't know why we would expect people to live off of that either. So
Yeah. Yeah. That is, I mean, certainly hadn't known very much about a lot of these things before, reading your book. And in your process of like pursuing government assistance programs, like I think many people might be surprised to hear things like that, and the path that it actually takes, like to get that assistance in the first place. And I think in the book you mentioned that you were overwhelmed how much work it was you had to prove that you were poor. Can you
yeah,
talk a bit about how you navigated that, in all the programs that you were trying to get support from?
yeah. Um, I realize there's a lot of privilege in that statement too. Like, as I've been talking about it over the years, like
Yeah.
um, I had to prove it over and over again, because I present as who I am, and I'm a white person. I don't fit I guess the assumed norm with people who are applying for food stamps. And then, there's always people who assume you're going to take advantage in some way. The the fraud rate for SNAP in particular has always been really low, like 6 or 7%, maybe as high as
Mhm.
8% sometimes. But every once in a while, you have somehow, like, people love to call out that people on food stamps are buying steaks or something
Mhm.
like that, and they're going to take advantage. And so um, a lot of this combines into what they call means testing, where in all the applications that you have for any kind of safety net program, um, like I had to prove that there was no burial plot that like was planned
Oh my
for me.
gosh.
Or a lot of states will include your vehicle, and in like the amount of money that you have. And
Wow.
um, most states, I think the federal regulation is somewhere around $2,500. Other states go up to 3,500, or they'll only like have a percentage of your car.
Yeah.
But it's very much like you need to prove that you don't have expensive art, or like anything that, or jewelry, or anything that you can possibly sell to get money for. And
Wow.
then we'll give you $200 a month for groceries.
Wow. So it sounds like some of these support systems are a bit broken. If I had to pick a word, do you think there is a better way for some of these uh, programs to be operating and to get that assistance to people who really need it than what
Oh,
you've had to experience?
I well, I used to say that the system was broken and that we needed to fix it somehow. But then, the more I learned about the class system and how closely tied racism and poverty are in
Yeah.
this country, I started to see like, oh, this is working exactly like it's intended to. We as a country rely on low wage workers, to serve us meals, to clean up after us, and you have to be in a kind of desperate place to do those jobs. And so I think that's what it's designed to do, is to keep you in survival mode so you will do the work no matter what. And I have seen that more and more through the pandemic, honestly. Like at the
Yeah.
beginning, I people were calling grocery store clerks essential and supporting the low wage workers, and Biden even text or tweeted at one point like, oh, they don't even have a sick day. And it was just like we suddenly realized that there was this huge population of people who were living paycheck to paycheck. And
Mm.
um and so I got really hopeful for a little while, and then the unemployment expansion started, where people would get an extra $600 a month for unemployment no matter what.
Yeah.
And my state in Montana was one of the first places to I think it was the first state to get rid of that. And our governor, who is just horrible, he offered, if you can show that you went off employment and got a job, you will get a bonus of $1,200. And that is enough for daycare for 2 kids for 1 month in my state.
Wow.
Like childcare costs are range a lot, but in my particular state, it never makes any sense to me. Like, okay, so you're going to force these people into low wage work and not offer them any help.
Yeah.
There's no universal childcare. There's no universal health care. There's no universal health care for kids. I mean, that's something
Yeah.
I don't really understand. Um, the people who are paid to take care of our kids are not paid very well. They're not paid a living wage. And it's just, there are so many things about how we have always treated people in poverty in this country that really keeps them in poverty.
Mm.
Um, and I believe that's on purpose.
Wow. Yeah, and I saw that after you had your book published and you also it seems like you also had the goal of getting this book into as many hands of policymakers as possible. One thing you did was you created a social campaign to send books to politicians. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, my dream, honestly,
Yeah.
was for Nancy Pelosi to stand up and Oprah style, like, and you get a book, and you get a book, and
Oh,
like at the middle of a session.
it can still happen. You can make this happen.
um,
Yeah.
I learned they're not allowed to accept gifts, and that counts.
Ah,
But despite that, we sent out close to 400 or 500 books.
wow.
And so I had a thing on my website that my friend helped me a lot with. But people could purchase a book, and then we sent it to their chosen representative in their state. So, state, or like a state senator or their main senator. A lot of people got multiple books. Uh, and so they would pay for the book, and then well, me and my husband handled like all the packaging and
Oh,
addressing.
wow.
I
Yeah.
had I had one person, my neighbor helped me. I hired him to help. Um, and we covered all of the Senate. I know that. And like maybe 200, 300 Congress people. So, or members of the
Wow.
House. Uh, so
That's
yeah, that
awesome.
was, we called it Maid number two. So Maid two reps. I was pretty proud of that for,
Nice. That's
yeah.
wonderful. That sounds like an amazing way to like broaden the reach. And talking a bit more about the positive responses that I've seen to your book Made, like a quick scan of social media, there's so many people reaching out to you with wonderful words of how your book truly struck a chord with them. And I just want to talk a bit more about like two specific but very different predominant themes of how your book is connected with others. So first off, there's a lot of people who read the book and are directly, they're saying that they have shared experiences. Did you anticipate that you would be connecting with a lot of other people in this way when you released the book?
I imagined myself writing a book for one person. I mean, not one person in
Wow.
particular, but
Yeah.
um, when I was going through it, there were really no personal stories that were authentic to mine.
Mm.
And I would search and search, and there was just nothing out there. So I wrote a book for them, the people who are, breastfeeding at 2 o'clock in the morning and searching the internet for any story that is like theirs so that they feel less alone.
Wow.
Um and so that was my personal intent. I did not expect uh I definitely did not expect critical acclaim. Like, I didn't expect anybody to really pay attention to the social justice part, because at that point I had been writing essays on the internet for a few years, and like I used to read the comment sections, and like I kind of knew how people felt about me talking about raising kids on food stamps.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
and so I expected more of that. And I expected more people to really not like the fact that I had published this whole book about it. And also, like, it's uh when I first had the essay go viral in Vox, I
Hmm.
about being a house cleaner that went on to get me the book deal. Um, I got hate mail for months. I mean, I still get hate.
Wow.
People called
Seriously.
me, people called me a vermin, a cockroach. They were so mad,
Oh my
um,
goodness.
I got a lot of threats to my physical being and my kids, and um, but I kind of realized that, oh, they're the ones who are feeling exposed, like, because
Yeah.
they're realizing that, like, the person who's cleaning their house notices stuff and might
Yeah.
go on to write about it on the internet someday. So, uh,
Wow.
so
Well,
yeah.
sorry. The
Oh, no, go
second
ahead.
part of the reaction that I was seeing that probably is the other side of that coin, was those responses of, "I had no idea this could happen to people in America. I did not realize that this was something that is going on." And so you said you were writing the book for that one person, but, did you also, have a goal of reaching those people who are perhaps very far away from your experiences to get them to put this on their radar and to expand their understanding of some of these realities?
Oh, absolutely. I actually share a birthday with Upton Sinclair, and he was one of my heroes as a teenager. The jungle and the muckraking and all the things that he did.
Yeah.
And he said about the jungle that I wrote a book about the meatpacking industry, but instead I hit people in the gut, or somehow, like, I got their stomachs instead of their heads. And so I really hoped for that with the book, that that the social justice side was kind of a gut punch,
Yeah.
because eating is so primal and so universal, and there are a lot of people who know what it's like to be fed by someone or to feed someone, but not a lot of people know what it's like to not be able to do that,
Yeah.
and to not be able to feed yourself and to not be able to feed your children. And so that was my gut punch that I was going for.
Yeah. And do you think talking more about our experiences is really also helping to remove the stigmas and hopefully through that gut punch change a lot of those, perceptions that you talked about before? How important is this in, building empathy and compassion and eventually creating change around this?
Well, I think there's a lot of power in, the personal narrative. Um, Melissa Febos actually just had a book come out today that is just an entire book about that, about how important, uh, first person narratives are.
Mm,
But for poor people, that is the most unaffordable thing that they can do. Because, you publish an op-ed and it pays like maybe 150 bucks, but it takes hours of your time to not only know how to write an op-ed, but, pitch and,
sure.
uh,
Yeah. How do you get
and then,
that
yeah.
out there?
So, I mean,
Oh my
but
goodness.
I think that is, I think that's the only way that we're going to see any sort of change in our country is by listening to people who live in the margins, especially listening to people of color and believing them, listening to survivors of domestic violence and believing their stories. And there's a lot of power in walking around in someone else's shoes. And
Yeah.
and so I think the more that we do that, I think the less that there's going to be shame wrapped up in struggle. And I don't know. I mean, maybe we'll share more on Instagram the hard times instead of the vacation selfies.
Right. That's a really good point there. Were you expecting the reach of your book to go as far as it has in such a short amount of time?
No. No, not at all. I mean, I've gone back and forth of like whether or not I really would prefer the reach to be huge because
Right, yeah.
I'm a very introverted and very shy person, and so, talking to strangers does not come naturally to me, and
Right.
but, I mean, when the Netflix series came out especially, I suddenly gained 150,000 followers across social media. My full-time job was doing interviews with people all over the world,
Wow.
um, and a lot of the comments that I had was, not only like I didn't realize it was that bad in America, but that's also very similar to what's going on here. And
Mm,
um, and so I think there was a lot of awareness that happened with the series and especially and with the book. Um, but I didn't really expect people to pay much attention to it.
mm,
I mean, when you're
wow.
watching um, I watch the news or I have it on a lot, 'cause it's kind of part of my job to stay up to date on stuff. And it's
Yeah,
so rare for them to even talk about the eviction crisis or to even say the word poverty. Uh,
yeah,
it's just not something that comes across our, line of vision on Twitter or, it's just not really something that comes up. And it feels so overwhelming that a lot of people don't really know what to do about it.
yeah, absolutely. And before we jump into some audience Q&A questions too, so on that topic, for people watching today who are inspired by your story and they want to go out and help others who are in that situation get out of poverty in some way that they can, do you have any advice on where they can start, whether it's specific like organizations they can look for or things that they can do differently to try and help contribute to solutions?
Yeah, I am sure there are many places in your community that uh, help assist or house people who can't afford those resources. And I kind of very bluntly tell people to just kind of get over yourself
Yeah.
and to just give them money. And, or, if
Yeah.
they have, I mean, poor people know very specifically what they need. And it's hardly ever something sexy. I mean, it's like socks, or it's,
Right.
I need pads, I need diapers, I need um, all of these things that cost cash money, but I can't get any benefits to pay for. So, housing is also a huge one. But I mean, it goes down to like gas vouchers. And I mean, I relied on, I would call 211 for help. um, you can pick up your phone and dial 211, and a person in your community will answer, and they will know what programs have funding.
Oh,
And
wow.
I used to get gas vouchers that way, and they were only $10 at a time, but that meant that I could go to work, and
Wow.
um, so it's such a small need for each personal person, I think, or each person in particular. um and it's not like you're going to get, handing some child their favorite doll and get to feel good about that,
Right. Yeah.
and I mean, you just need to recognize that you're handing out band-aids. I mean,
Right.
you're handing out band-aids for a gaping wound. And, you're helping a little bit, and just doing whatever you can, calling the homeless shelters, calling the domestic violence shelters in your community, and just they will always have a list of what their residents need. And if they need a bunch of socks, then give them a bunch of socks.
That's great advice for sure. Um, all right. I guess I think we have some audience questions in the queue. Let's see. All right, from Joseph. I was struck in the book by how difficult it was to understand and apply for various social programs. Is that something you can imagine Google products helping with?
Well, honestly, I have no idea what you guys can do. Um, I mean, sure, if you can, streamline the process. For a while, you could fill out one form. Like, if you qualified for SNAP, then you qualified for utility assistance, you qualified for free lunches. Sometimes you even qualified for Medicaid automatically for your kids. And that went away. And so I'm I don't know what it's like now, because 'cause I've been out of it for 5 or
Sure.
6 years. But I still think it's you need to apply for every program separately. And so
Mm,
that means you need to provide 3 months worth of pay stubs or income, all of your utility bills, all of, rent, how much your car is worth. Like, there's so much paperwork. I used to carry around
sure.
a folder that I never left home without, because it was, every 2 to 3 months, I had to go through a recertification process, um, where I
Wow.
had to meet with a caseworker during the day, which, those are work hours, and I had to fill out a stack of paperwork. There were times, I mean, it was a good 10 or 15 hours a week sometimes, just to get all of the um, stuff handed in and approved, to receive a couple $100 a month in food
Oh my
benefits.
goodness.
Um,
Wow.
so I think any way that that process could be streamlined in some way, or
So
even,
streamlining, getting the information and also being able to get that information to, the applications and things that need to happen on
yeah, or
that
if you
side.
could just apply online, which is a whole other thing in itself. I mean,
Sure.
people in poverty need smartphones, and they need access to internet, and they need things like that. So any programs that you can do that might help that, would be awesome. I mean, because I didn't really have that great of a setup. I had a cheap laptop, a printer that luckily stuck it through for several, and, internet access, but I that was a huge
Yeah.
expense. And so I think any way that you can make things more accessible, for applications, and just more accessible to find jobs, to, job searching, or just to have a phone number that somebody can call them at, is I think a lot of people don't realize that there are a lot of ways that, you can fall through the cracks,
Yeah.
with that. So, yeah, any way that you can make it easier is great.
All right. Let's take another question. All right. So, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness lacks the word collective. How do we try to undo this deeply entrenched societal value of individualism, which is toxic when mixed with gross inequality?
Um, I think I have a friend, Michael Tubbs. He was recently the mayor in Stockton, and he started a universal basic income, program for 500 residents. And he talks a lot about how we need to remove dignity that is assigned to work
Yeah.
and put it back in where it needs to go, is just being alive. We should all start out with the same amount of dignity just for being born,
Yeah.
instead of what our potential is, or especially when you're in government assistance programs, you are oftentimes required to work 20 hours a week in order to receive benefits. And I never understood that, because I felt like the only value that I had as a human being was how much work I could do at this, like,
Right.
pretty literally crappy job. And so, like, and that stuck with me. I mean, I still struggle with that, of only feeling like I have value if I am physically working in some way. And um we could start there for sure.
Not a small task. All right. Next question. I loved your book. I was really struck by your intimate view into the lives of your customers. Did you learn anything about them that changed your perspective of them or America in general?
um I think I didn't realize, phew.
You probably learned a lot, and I can
One of the
envision the
things, I think,
Rolodex you're going through. Yeah.
I mean, I had all range of clients. I had clients who really couldn't afford house cleaning, but they needed it because, they're chronically ill, or, older, or, just weren't home very much because they were working all the time.
Yeah.
Uh, and and so, for some of them, it was a necessity or a huge extravagance, and then for others, it was kind of an entitlement. Um, and I think the hardest thing that I learned while I was cleaning houses was, that a lot of the people that I cleaned houses for were my age.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and and they had this huge house on a golf course with, the 2 kids and the huge rooms, and at the time, I felt like I had somehow failed just in society,
Mm,
um, because they had all of this stuff, and I didn't really understand, like, why they had it. um, and of course, I've later learned about, like, all of the invisible, support systems that a lot of people have, like
right.
parents who can afford to put them through college, help with the down payment of a house. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it goes on and on. And
Yeah.
and
There's
I
so
just
many
didn't
things like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
I just didn't have that. I I'm not sure what I really learned about America in general, just because the area that I lived in was extremely white and not very diverse. I mean, there was a migrant population who worked, and it was a huge farming community. So, but um, my paths didn't really cross. Most of my clients were extremely white and kind of wealthy, and maybe a little bit comfortable. And um, so I don't know. Now I end up talking about, being sure to tip your housekeeper when you stay at a hotel.
There you
Uh,
go. That's a good
and
one.
I also talk a lot about, like, balling up all of your towels and putting them in the shower. Like, I usually, like, tear down the bed, like, not tear it down, but, like,
Sure.
take all the sheets off, take the pillowcases off, because that's a really physical part of the job for them. I leave a tip. Recently, I've been leaving my book, but,
That's
like, a
amazing.
signed
Yeah.
copy of my book, which I don't know if that's useful or not, but, and just, recognizing that there are dozens and dozens of people who are cleaning up after someone, and that's their job is to make our lives easier, but we're not making their lives easier. And
Yeah.
so, any way that you can vote someone into office who recognizes that, or, has a very realistic or lived experience view of, what it's like to live in poverty, and to lack means, um,
Yeah.
the better. I mean, we need more people in this country who know what it's like to live that life.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of old white guys making all the decisions, you know, that are
Yeah.
so
It's hard.
separated from everything.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine, decisions being made with no input from anybody living through those experiences. All right. Let's see. I think we have a couple more questions. All right. So, do you consider Nickel and Dimed to be one of the stories that's authentic to yours?
Uh, whew, um, so I, of course, read that book when it first came out. It was like the late 90s. Um, I was working all of those kinds of jobs. I never did retail, but I, had worked as a waitress. I had worked as a house cleaner. I worked for the Merry Maids for a little while. Um, and I read that book again, when I was editing Maid, and saw that a lot of that book is just trying to find a place to live. And,
Wow.
um, and there's a lot of struggle there of trying to find, even a motel room that she can stay in. Um, and, it is a little dated at this point. There's some things in there that are kind of, but the I think what she went through was kind of accurate. I mean, she obviously did the work, but she could always go home. And,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I talked to her about that. And I mean, she talked about it in the forward for the book too. Just, I mean, she was one phone call away from getting out. And to have that is really huge. Um, and we did a book event together at Politics and Prose in DC, and she started talking about how she felt discriminated against because she was in her maid uniform. And she turned to me and asked me if I had felt that. And I said, well, I was using food stamps. Like,
Yeah.
there's a big
There's
difference there.
many
So,
more layers on that. Yeah.
yeah. So I
Mhm.
really think it's impossible to have an authentic experience. Um, I mean, the food stamp challenge many years ago, I mean, Gwyneth Paltrow participated and she bought limes. And I was like, who buys limes on food stamps? It's like, it's this little tiny thing that's like $3. Like,
Sure.
no. Um, so, I appreciate people trying and
Yeah.
but no, I don't think there's any way that you're truly going to live it unless you are at that level of insecurity where at any
Yeah.
moment the rug can be pulled out from underneath you.
Yeah. All right. I think we have a couple more questions. All right. One stigma domestic violence victims face is being blamed for staying in a relationship. Did you experience that after you left? And how did you help others understand your situation?
Um, Personally at the time, yeah, I lost some friends
Wow.
because I was in and out of that relationship and kept trying to make it work. And I don't think people really understand a lot of just that situation. And, for me, it was, there was a lot of biological things going on. I wanted to be with the person who had fathered my child,
Yeah.
um, and just wanting that not only for me, but wanting it for my kid.
Yeah.
And there's just so much. I mean, everybody around you talks about, like, how charming he is. I don't understand why he's having such a problem with you in particular, and it very much
Right.
feels like it's your fault. And so there are so many things that go into that. A lot of it is financial control and very controlled isolation. Um, and the abuser's motive is to tear you down. And so when you're torn down to the part of yourself that is the darkest, and you don't really
Mm.
feel like you can reach out for help, you usually don't. Um,
Yeah.
and so, and it's really easy to get sucked back in. I really appreciated that part of the series where Alex went back and
Yeah.
it showed how easy it is to get sucked back in and to be even worse off than you were when you initially left.
Yeah. Oh goodness. All right. We have time for one more question. All right. Read the book and learned a lot from it. Thanks for writing it. My question: are you planning to write a follow up book or anything to discuss how you continued your studies and got out of poverty?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, my next book is called Class. And it's basically about my senior year of college, when I got pregnant with my second child, and completed the year as a very pregnant person, but also was kicked off of food stamps at one point. I mentioned that earlier because I could only work 15 hours a week, and so I lost my food benefit amount, um, and then there was uh, just a lot that happened in that year of housing insecurity, of feeling like my landlord didn't really want me as a tenant anymore. Uh, and we eventually made it into low income housing, which really allowed me to focus on writing and learning how to be a freelance writer, and kind of writing my way out of poverty, I guess.
And can we expect that this year, your book?
It's so hard to write right now. It has been really
I
hard.
didn't mean to add any pressure. I just wanted to increase any excitement to look out for the book,
Yeah, I
later
mean,
this year or
it's
something.
definitely coming, but that is, like, one of the hardest things that I have been trying to do for the last 2 years with 3 kids at
Sure.
home, and
Oh my
just all the
goodness.
stuff that's going on through the pandemic, and, then you add a bunch of pregnancy losses into the mix, and it's just,
Mm,
it's been a struggle,
wow.
but I will be the most excited person in the world to have that book be published.
Excellent. And we
Because
will
it's
all
finally out there and it's done, and I don't have to worry about it anymore.
amazing. We're all going to be looking out for it for sure. So thank you so much again, Stephanie, for speaking with us today. You're, truly inspiring so many people, and it's really been a pleasure talking to you. Once again, Stephanie's book is called Maid: Hard Work, Low Pay, and a Mother's Will to Survive. Definitely be sure to go out, get your copy, check out the Netflix series Maid, and also pop over to Stephanie's website, which is stepville.com. Thank you so much, Stephanie, and we hope to chat with you on the next book.
Yeah, I'll be available.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.